even in his absence, would you help me celebrate my brother, your pastor, the Right Reverend Dr. J. Lawrence Turner? I think y'all could do a little better than that. And salute to his wife, Bridget, and the kids, and to the Honorable Reverend Dr. Alvin O'Neill Jackson. Amen. To Dr. Hogan. And one more person before you sit down. The artist formerly known as Prince once penned a song asking this question: could you be the most beautiful girl in the world? I confess I'm biased, but I know who he was talking about. He was talking about my wife, Denise, and I'm glad that she is here today. Y'all give it up. That's my sugar honey iced tea. Some of y'all to get that on the way home. You may be seated in the presence of the Lord. I am elephantly elated, giraffe glad, and hippopotamus happy to be at the Boulevard on this Sunday. It is indeed a blessing and a burden. It's a blessing because I have seen so many people who have meant so much to me during my ministerial sojourn. So many people who have prayed with me, prayed for me, prayed me through stuff. This is the place where I cut my ministerial teeth, and I'm not lost on the magnitude of this moment. I'm trying to soak it all up, but Dr. Leo Davis and his choir just does something to folk, don't they? Give it up for Dr. Davis, and it is impeccable, and clearly certain things never change. It was impeccable many years ago as I was here, and it is still impeccable right now. And I would say that Pastor Turner is one of the few people who can get me to preach in a robe on the third Sunday. Some of y'all who know me, y'all laughing because like, oh wow, yeah, he's uh-huh. And for those that don't know me, I used to anchor myself right up in that balcony over there. So I'm letting them borrow my seat this Sunday. There's no way that I could fill in for somebody as magnanimous as the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson. But I am honored to stand on his shoulders and on the shoulders of all of those forerunners in the struggle for freedom. It didn't take long in my time on the front lines for me to realize this ain't nothing to play with. And also didn't take me long to realize there will never be another Dr. King. And there will never be another Jesse Lewis Jackson. So I'm mindful that I am standing in a space with shoes too big for my own feet to fill. So I brought my own. Won't you take your Bible into the book of John in the 5th chapter, John chapter 5. I want to begin reading with the 5th verse. For those hearing me for the first time, I preach from the EIV. That's the Earle International Version of the Bible. And it ain't published yet. It just helps me preach better. Amen. Also, it's only a few people who Denise will allow me to say I love in public who are sisters, and one of them is here on the front row. We were ordained together right there, and that is the Reverend Sonia Loudon Walker. I love me some Sonia. I had to lift her up because I know that's my one good amen. And Denise will cut y'all if y'all don't shout. No, I'm just playing. John chapter 5, beginning with the 5th verse, you find some words that sound something like this. One man was there who had been sick for 38 years, waiting on health insurance. When Jesus saw him laying there, he knew he had been there a long time, and he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" And the man answered him, saying, "Sir, I don't have anybody to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. While I'm making my way, somebody cuts me in line. They step down ahead of me." And Jesus said to him, this is verse 8, "Stand up, take up your mat, and start walking." Church folk don't know when to shout, do they? Verse 9 says, at once the man was made well. He took up his mat and began to walk. Now today was the Sabbath. Let me just add a little addendum before you take your seat about that. Now today was the Sabbath part, because what that would technically means is Jesus just broke the law. Maybe somebody should tell Paula White to read the Bible. I want to preach as you pray, using this for a thought. Help yourself. Would you turn to a neighbor and say, neighbor, help yourself. Okay, find a better looking neighbor with better smelling breath. I ain't tell you where to sit this morning. And say, oh neighbor, help yourself. Say, speak, Lord. We're listening. Amen. You may be seated even in the presence of our God. Jesus said to him, stand up, take up your mat, and start walking. Dr. Jackson, it was Jamal's first time at a restaurant like this. He was invited by a friend who paid his fee. They were escorted to their table, and since his friend was a regular at this restaurant, the waiter simply gave them their utensils, took their drink order, and walked away. Jamal's friend, again a regular at this restaurant, darted directly towards the seafood section. Jamal sat at the table, both puzzled and waiting patiently. Jamal had come from what we would call an underprivileged environment. He had become accustomed to scarcity. Often in Jamal's house, there was more month than money and more bills than blessings. The few times Jamal had been afforded the opportunity to eat at a restaurant, he had been served by a waiter who took his food order, gave it to the cooks. The food was cooked and delivered to the table. Jamal had been conditioned to depend upon the patronage and provision of other people to obtain and encounter his ideal dining experience. But this restaurant was different, Brother Kyles, and Jamal was taken aback, Sonia. He just sat there, and when his friend came back with a plate full of food, Mikhail, Jamal's confusion reached its apex. Jamal had been sitting there, Leo, for several minutes now, watching everybody whiz past him with food, but he was sitting there waiting to be served. His friend sat down next to him and perceived something was wrong, so he asked him, hey man, aren't you hungry? And Jamal said, yes, where's the waiter at? And Jamal's friend said, the waiter has gone to get the drinks, but this is an all-you-can-eat buffet. If you're hungry, get up, grab a plate, and help yourself. Doors of the church is open. Come by letter, Christian Experience, candidate for baptism at the Mississippi Boulevard Christian Baptist Church. But can we be honest for a second, Sister Carol? There's a lot of preaching possibility in this predicament, and I think that it's tragic how it aligns with the contours of our own context and the paradigm of our preaching text. There's Jamal. You see him in the middle of a food oasis with several different options to deal with his hunger. But Jamal had become a victim of a set of experiences that rendered him paralyzed by what I'd call an unnecessarily unfulfilled promise. Are y'all praying with me? See, Jamal's story is not much different than the story of black people in our yet-to-be United States of America. Black and brown folks often find ourselves oppressed and underprivileged. We find ourselves unfulfilled and dissatisfied in what claims to be a land of freedom, justice, and equality for all. We've been conditioned to believe that to obtain the freedom, the justice, and the equity we deserve, somebody or some governing body has to grant it to us. And while we've been waiting to be served, our people keep dying. While we're waiting to be served, we keep being exploited. We keep being starved of the social and the spiritual satisfaction we've been promised, but we haven't always collectively pursued. We've watched others get their healing, watched as others get their deliverance, their peace, their field, if you will. And there we are, brothers and sisters, in the same proximity, in the same location, in the same country, in the same city and county and context and culture, but we're existentially empty and spiritually starved. Have I got any company in the building? We've seen other folk, especially rich white men like the one in the White House built by black slaves, rich white men like the one who just moved into the governor's mansion here in Tennessee, rich white men like the one in City Hall, get their fill, often taking it by force. They'll pass hateful legislation, they'll manipulate elections, they'll suppress the vote, all in the name of democracy. They do this with no apology, but so many of us remain on the sidelines watching and whining, waiting for somebody else to come serve us and waiting for somebody else to come save us. In other words, Mississippi Boulevard, too many of us have embraced a pacifist posture that leaves us paralyzed by what I'd like to call an unnecessarily unfulfilled promise. If I were that Abyssinian, somebody say, "Preach, young man. I'm doing the best I can. Help me in here. Don't misunderstand me. And if you quote me correctly. And if you tweet me, give a brother credit. I know we live in a country and a context that's wrought with all manner of discrimination, especially against black and brown bodies. I know we live in a country, a culture, and a context wrought with sexism and classism and anti-womanhood and homophobia and transphobia. I know we live in a major county and city full of poverty and predatory lending and social exploitation and political manipulation. We live in our own Bethesda, if you will. It's a place where people have been relegated to God-forsaken conditions and ailments, often by public policy. We live in a white supremacist and patriarchal system that heaps violence and trauma on black, brown, and female bodies and renders them lame, left, dumb, and blind. Too fast? Let me rewind, press play, bag it up, and dump it. I said we live in a white supremacist and patriarchal system that heaps violence and trauma on black and brown and female bodies and renders us lame, deaf, dumb, and blind. And here is my early Sunday morning announcement, and that is simply the only way we will get out of Bethesda is if we become enlightened enough and empowered enough to help ourselves. I said something, I feel it already right early. Help ourselves, because, can I tell you why? Because freedom always requires a personal investment in your spiritual and physical well-being. But you know why that clap ain't that strong? Because I'm convinced some of us don't want to be free. It costs too much. It comes with too much responsibility. Some of us don't want to be healed, we just want a pain pill. Some folk don't really want joy, we just want a quick fix. I can't hear nobody talking to me. Some of us don't want peace, we just want some folk to shut up. Some of us don't want liberation, we'd rather just have some medication. Preach, Pastor Earle. Y'all do know that that's what this brother at this pool of Bethesda really wanted. He'd been there 38 years, well, I'm in the South, 38 years, watching everybody who needs a healing get a healing except for him. The text says that at this pool, there's a plethora of people who've been suffering from all manner of dis-ease, but there's this one somebody, been there 38 years, waiting on them to pass a health care bill. 38 years, waiting for Congress to get their act together. 38 years for folk who through our tax dollars got health insurance, but won't pass a bill for those who pay their salary to get health insurance. I can't hear nobody talking to me. 38 years waiting on health insurance, and the text says Jesus, watch this, hones in on him. Jesus is in a place where there are all manner and various types of disease, but notice he did not throw a one-size blanket, everybody under the same umbrella prescription out to this brother. Jesus doesn't have a trickle-down theology. Jesus doesn't have a rising tides, floats all boats type ministry. Jesus pivots his power on the person who has been there the longest and is most likely the one who needed the most help. Come here, brothers and sisters. Lean in real close and hear me clearly. That's what we mean when we say Black Lives Matter. It doesn't mean that other lives are irrelevant. It means that those of us who endure the most hell are the ones who need the most help. And I'm glad to report that the God I serve can meet our needs with specificity. God don't have to give you a blanket blessing. God don't have to give you the same blessing God gives everybody else. God will look beyond all of our faults and find our exact need. I know it's early in this service and I ain't come to do this quite yet, but would you look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, we serve a God that meets our needs with specificity. Woo. I ain't come here to hit you. I just ain't come here to miss you neither. Be seated. The folk around you ain't got it yet. Here's what'll happen. I'll keep preaching. They'll stand up. You just stand up again because I don't want them to feel bad because they missed it at first. Jesus pivots on the pain and the plight of this brother specifically. He says, hey, bro, you good? You straight? You all right? Look like you've been here a minute. Ain't you tired of other folk coming through here? You see them come diseased, but they leave delivered. Ain't you tired of watching everybody else get their breakthrough? Ain't you tired of watching everybody else get their needs met? What's holding you up? What is it about you that has you stuck in this situation for 38 years with no significant progress? What is it about us that has the poverty rate in 2018 looking like the poverty rate in 68? Jesus says, do you even want to be healed? And this brother says, tell me if this sounds familiar. Ain't my fault. I ain't got nobody to put me in the pool, son. They too fast. They too greedy. They too white. They too rich. They too Republican. They too Democrat. They won't let me get in the pool when the pool has been stirred up. That's why I'm here. Somebody else's fault. I know that's unpopular preaching in the 21st century, right? It reminds me of Jamal at that restaurant. It reminds me of so many black folks in this system of white supremacy. This brother had become so complicit in his own oppression, so well adjusted to a system of injustice that he never considered that he had within him the capacity to help himself. I know the Boulevard is a major church with some major preachers, so let me give you some background and context. That pool was said to be troubled by the Spirit of God, and whoever got in the pool first was said to be healed. But you do know that this brother had what I'd like to call, Dr. Jackson, a public option. Walk with me here. He could have rolled himself into the pool before the Spirit troubled the waters. Can I translate that into 21st century language? He could have shut the whole operation down. He could have demanded after 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. Baby, it's been long enough. And if I can't get my healing, ain't nobody getting healed around this bad boy. I'll shut this whole thing down. If you're not going to honor my life, I'm not going to allow your life to be one of ease and convenience. And I stopped by Mississippi Boulevard on MLK Sunday to say something MLK would say shutting it down is always an option. And be clear, I'm not talking about an arrogant and ignorant government shutdown. No, baby, that's a temper tantrum by a privileged political puppet over a wall that won't work anyway. I'm talking about the shutdown of an inequitable system. And shutting it down is always, that I remember the day after the bridge got shut down. I was on the front line when the bridge of I-240 got shut down. The next day, we had a meeting at Greater Imani with Bill Atkins and the mayor of Memphis and the police director now. And I remember us having this conversation, and I was listening to everybody testify about what the issue was back and forth. And I heard something that was missing. And I knew I only had a few minutes because everybody had something to say. I said, I'm going to get this mic. I'm going to say what I believe God has told me to say, and then I'm going to be done. I grabbed the microphone. I said, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, with all due respect, I'm not sure if everybody understands the magnitude of where we are right now, because this situation is dire, which means the people are desperate. And everybody won't understand, because unless you have been in your car and you see them blue lights flash behind you and you grip the hell out of that steering wheel because you don't know if you're going to make it home, you might not be built for this. And since we love our lives more than other people love our lives, we are willing to do whatever we have to do to get our people free, which means what? If ever we need to shut it down, we always reserve the right to shut it down. And can I tell you, you shut it down as an option, because improving your condition is never contingent upon your oppressor's convenience. In other words, I feel a Malcolm spirit over me. You can help yourself by any means necessary, and you don't have to wait for somebody to say it's okay or to give you permission. If you're waiting for your oppressor to grant you permission to fight for your freedom, you'll be in bondage for the rest of your life. Would you turn to a neighbor and say, you can shut it down if you have to? This fool shut something down over something minuscule. But not only does the brother not shut it down, he blames everybody else for him not getting what he needed. And I'm all for systems critique, be clear. But it's Jesus' response, Leo, that shouts me. Watch this, brother. The man offered up some excuses. The Bible says, Jeremy, Jesus said, stand up, take up your mat, and start walking. Whew, half of y'all missed that. Let me rewind, press play. This man lifted up all manner of excuses. I can see Jesus. You know how black folk do. Yeah, bro. Stand up, take up your mat, and start. Y'all still ain't got it yet. He was laying out the litany list of impropriety and inequity, and Jesus said, stand up, take up your mat, and start walking. Jesus didn't call a church meeting or a prayer meeting. He said, stand up, take up your mat, and start walking. He didn't call for a priest to come by and lay hands on him. He said, stand up, take up, y'all still ain't got it, and start walking. He didn't wait for a bill to pass through the Roman Congress. He said, stand up, take up. He said, help yourself. Stand up. I ain't standing you up. I'm not standing in your spot. I'm not going to reach down and lift you up. Stand up and take up your mat. I'm not picking it up for you. I'm not sending an angel to come pick it up. I'm not going to pray that your mat be removed in Jesus' name. Stand up, take up your mat, and start walking. In other words, brothers and sisters, Jesus said, help yourself. How much time I got? Because I feel something. The good news is Jesus told this man he could use what he already had to work towards the healing he needed. Brother Renfro, Jesus gave him a word so he could do his own work. Doors of the church is open. He gave him a word and said, now you go do the work. Jesus chooses not to simply help the man, because that would just heal him of a symptom. He chose to empower the man to help himself, because that would heal him of an unjust system. He told him, help yourself. He tells him, and he's telling us to help ourselves by doing three things, and I'm done. First thing, Jesus said, help yourself change your posture. He said, Brother Hunt, he said, stand up. Now, Jesus is talking to a brother, Pastor Brody, who had been pressed down by an exploitative and unjust system for 38 years. And Jesus tells him to change his posture from a posture of defeat to a posture of dignity. Stand up. He said, change your posture from a posture of pity to a posture of power. He said, stand up. Now, notice he didn't immediately say, start walking. And he didn't say, be healed. He says, stand up. Let's start with your posture. He is saying something I heard King say before. Even if you can't run, walk. And even if you can't walk, you don't have to lay down in the posture of defeat. Step one is stand. Would you turn to somebody and say, stand up? He says, do something. He said, even if the system smacks you down 7 times, stand up 8. Even if your knees feel weak, even if your feet feel frail, stand up. Because if you can stand up, God, I feel something. It communicates to the enemy that in spite of all you've been through, you might be hurt, but you're still in the fight. Who am I preaching to? You might be wounded, but you're still in the fight. When I was younger, I watched a movie. It's called The Karate Kid, the original one, not with Will Smith's son, the real one. The Karate Kid with Daniel LaRusso, Ralph Macchio. He was in a championship match, and his opponent was fighting dirty. The match was almost at the end. His opponent, Johnny, did an illegal sweep kick and injured Daniel's leg. And there's Daniel. You see him laying on the mat in pain. Looked like he couldn't continue. He was wounded. He was injured. He couldn't move like he had been moving, but the Karate Kid started to remember a stance. Help me, Holy Ghost. It was a stance that he had seen his mentor, Mr. Miyagi, in. It's called the crane stance. The crane stance is named after a bird that a man saw fighting a gorilla in the forest. The crane would stand in one spot, and the big, bold gorilla would swing, but the crane would dodge the punch and peck the gorilla. Peck the gorilla to death. The man was so amazed by the elusiveness of this bird, he developed a technique in honor of it. Come back with me to that famous scene in The Karate Kid when Daniel is dragging himself up off that mat. He's barely able to move. His knees are buckling, but he starts to stand up. Seems like he's off balance, but he starts to stand up. He looks rather helpless, but he's still standing. Only on one good leg, but he's still standing up. And since he's standing, the judge knows that the fight is still on. Come help me preach right here. That opponent came in, and just like the crane did the gorilla, the opponent swung. Daniel dipped, rose up on that one good leg, and kicked the hell out of his opponent. And I stopped by Mississippi Boulevard to testify and tell somebody, you don't have to wait on God to show up, because God is waiting on you to stand up. The Bible says, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Would you turn to your neighbor and say, stand up? Half of y'all got it. Other half, I'm at the Boulevard. We got some bougie tendencies from time to time. So let me come and get them before I wrap it up. Here it is. This is the tough one. Because not only does he tell him change his posture, stand up, he also told him to certify his prerogative. He said, take up your mat. In other words, he told him, make sure you keep your receipts. Yeah. I felt that in my Igbo shata. He said, stand up. Then he said, take up your mat. Leo, when I first read that, it bothered me. Why not leave the mat behind, Sister Palmer? Why not walk into a new season? Why not do all of that good, cheesy Christian cliche stuff? Why come Jesus ain't telling them forget the former things? Then it dawned on me, Brother Coleman, if the brother had left the mat, somebody else would have had to tell his story for him, because he wouldn't have evidence of what he had been through. he wouldn't have the receipts he needed to authenticate his testimony. And the mats are meant to remind us of what sustained us when life was at its lowest. The mats remind us of the struggle, and the mat is what makes sure you never get too big for your britches. Your mat makes sure you never forget how far God brought you from, and a mat will show somebody else that your prerogative is certified because you got some receipts. It's some scholars who argue that this mat was given to him by the government, and if he had left that mat, then the government would lie about how benevolent they were towards him. They'd lie about how progress was made. In other words, brothers and sisters, Jesus is thinking about how his life would be after his healing. And I don't know about y'all, but some of us know there's always some folk who you run into after you've been healed, after you've been changed, after you met Jesus. They see some glory, but they don't know your story. They see your perspective, they hear your prerogative, and they always ask crazy questions. Who he think he is, talking to the mayor like that? Who they think they are, protesting where they protesting? What qualifies him to speak about this? What makes her think that she can do what she do? Baby, there's somebody in the building who picked up your mat this morning, and you can testify, I paid for this. I fought for this. How do I preach like that? I've been through hell for this. I cried for this. I struggled for this. And is there anybody in this building who can stand up and testify? I paid for it. I paid for my blessing. I paid for my healing. Paid for my anointing. Prayed for my breakthrough. Prayed for this fight. Would you turn to your neighbor and shake your neighbor's hand and say, neighbor, you see some glory, but let me tell you a story. This thing that I have did not come free, and it didn't come cheap. I paid for it. I got the scrapes to prove it. I got the scars to prove it. I got the doctor bill to prove it. That's why our ancestors said, through many dangers, toils and snares, I have already come. It was grace that brought me safe thus far. I got the receipt. Grace gonna lead me on. I'm done. Let me get this last point, because I don't know when I'll be back at the Boulevard. Here's the last point, and I'm done. Not only does Jesus encourage us to change our posture, stand up, and to certify our prerogative, take up your mat, but lastly, he demands that we commit to progression. Y'all caught that? Y'all caught what I pitched? He said, stand up, take up your mat, and start walking. Come here. He says, don't be stuck in the moment of what I'm doing. I know. I should have just closed on the second point, right? Because y'all gonna act stingy with your amens here. He says, don't get your healing, Pastor Perry, and stand still. I'm gonna see how honest we're willing to be. And I'm done. Y'all ain't got to put up with me much longer. I see, what's that, 12 seconds on the clock? 9, 8. I'm gonna just wait till it go out to let y'all know I'm preaching this last point. No disrespect. Okay, y'all gonna reset the clock? Just give me 3.5 minutes. Maybe even 4. Y'all play too much. I'm gonna see how honest we'll be, Sister Sheila. Too often, we end up stuck at the place where we met God, or where God once moved in our behalf. And if I'm honest, too many of us are stuck on what God did for us in '68, or 2008, or 2 weeks ago. We can't see what God is doing right now, but our God is a living God. I hear C sharp coming over me. Our God is a moving God. And some of us have become so fixated on where God has moved that we can't even recognize where God is moving. Good evening, Mississippi Boulevard. May the Lord bless you real good. But please take that nugget with you. Some of us have become so fixated on where God has moved that we can't even recognize where God is moving. There's a story told of two monks who were walking on a pilgrimage. While on their journey, they came to a river where they met a beautiful young woman who was dressed rather provocatively. The woman was afraid that the water would ruin her clothes and expose what was underneath. So she asked the brothers if somebody would carry her across the water. This would be breaking their religious custom. And the younger of the two monks was offended at the idea and turned away from girlfriend in disgust and disdain. But the elder monk, somebody help me in here, without hesitation, picked girlfriend up on his shoulders, carried her across the water, and let her down safely on the other side. The woman thanked him, and he waded back through the water. As the monks resumed their walk, they were approaching one of the sites in the area. It was a site of awe-inspiring natural wonder, but the younger one was still disgusted and distracted. He could not keep his peace, and he shouted, "Brother, you know the rules. You know the laws. We're taught to avoid contact with women. But not only did you touch her, you carried her on your shoulders." And this elder monk looked at the young monk and smiled. He said, "Young brother, I dropped her off back there and kept walking. And you should have done the same thing, because you're so focused on what God did back there that you can't even appreciate what God is doing right here." Good night, sweet children. May the Lord bless you real good. But is there anybody in here that can testify? I'm committed to progression, and I will not let where God has moved to make me miss where God is moving. Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take up your mat, and start walking." I need your help to preach. Jesus does not want somebody healed but still held up. Jesus doesn't want us inspired but still immobile. God does not want us to be free but still stagnant. And I'm glad today that Jesus didn't tell him where to walk to. He just told him, start walking. He didn't tell him how fast to walk. He told him to start walking. Jesus is saying, and I'm in my seat, just because I met you here does not mean I'm leaving you here. Who am I preaching to? I'm about to shout out my own shoes. Let me share this and take my seat. This text proves to this man that the power was never in the pool, but the power is in the presence of God. And the God I serve will walk with you, will march with you, will step with you all along the way. Good evening, Mississippi Boulevard. May the Lord bless you real good. But I'm in my seat now, and my soul is happy, because I remember what our ancestors said. I come to the garden alone while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. Won't you put your preacher voice on? Turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. And the joy, look at your neighbor and say, joy. Y'all ain't doing it. Look at your neighbor, put your preacher voice on, and shout, joy. The joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Good evening, Mississippi Boulevard. I'm trying to take my seat, but my soul is happy. Have you any rivers that seem uncrossable? Have you any mountains you can't seem to tunnel through? God specializes in things that seem impossible. He can do what no other power is able to do. Shout yes. Shout yes. Shout yes. Shout yes. Shout yes.